I am sure that most problems can be solved through ordinary communication. Just sit down and talk. If I don't like something or something bothers me, I will always say it and will not be silent. Which cannot be said about my wife, who did not try to talk to me 20 years ago, which is why my marriage collapsed in one day. At 9:30 that Thursday morning, Tony, was headed home to check if I'd forgotten my phone. It wasn't in my office, and I'd already searched the car. This was my last hope. I had a meeting scheduled with Dave McGregor that afternoon, and if it went well, the commission on that contract alone could be worth thousands. We were a local, competitive, and reliable option, practically guaranteed the business, unless I managed to upset the owner at the 11th hour. Dave had mentioned he needed to address some family issues first and instructed me to reach out to him on his private number to finalize the meeting details. Unfortunately, that number was only saved on my phone, so finding it was crucial. As I drove, I sang along to a Santana song playing through my car's media system from my USB playlist. Although the Zombies originally performed it, I favored Carlos' rendition. It felt smoother to me. Do you have faith in destiny? I didn't used to. I found humor in the joke. 3 conspiracy theorists walked into a bar. You can't tell me that was a coincidence. Was it chance that I was still humming the last verse when I attempted to open the front door only to discover it was locked? In that moment, I simply presumed she was in the garden. It wasn't common in our village to lock the door while we were inside, but if she was busy in the backyard, it could explain it. I retrieved my key, unlocked the door, and checked to see if Carrie had left my phone on the hallway table. It wasn't there. Suddenly, my smartwatch vibrated briefly, indicating it had connected to my paired phone. Thank goodness. Now I knew it was somewhere in the house. I tapped the screen on my watch and selected Find. Almost immediately, an eerie female voice exclaimed, "I'm here," accompanied by a musical tone. I followed the sound into the living room, where the repeated message seemed to be emanating from an armchair. Of course, I had set my phone on the chair arm after finishing my coffee that morning, and it must have slipped into the gap between the seat cushion and the arm, unnoticed by me. Retrieving it with a sigh of relief, I quickly sent Dave a text message. "Dave, I trust all is well. Just inform me when it's convenient for us to meet. I can adjust my schedule easily. Tony." He responded almost immediately, stating that a family emergency required him to travel north for a while. He needed to leave first thing tomorrow. He suggested meeting tonight at the King's Oak Hotel at 7 to discuss terms over drinks. His treat. "Certainly," I replied. "I'll see you there." With my schedule now arranged, I went to find Carrie to inform her that I might have inadvertently disrupted any plans she had made for our evening. However, she was nowhere to be found, neither in the house nor the garden, despite today being designated as housework day. As I entered the kitchen, I noticed the sheets on the line indicating that she had already stripped our bed and washed the linen. Shrugging, I decided to call her phone. A fleeting realization crossed my mind. I hadn't seen her car parked on the street either. She gasped for breath as she finally picked up. "Hey, love, is everything okay?" she inquired, clearly concerned by my unexpected call. "Yeah, everything's fine," I assured her, explaining my change of plans. "You sound like you've been running. Where are you?" She chuckled. Oh, how I adored that laugh. "I was out in the garden hanging up the laundry when you called, and I'd left my phone in the kitchen. I had to rush inside to answer before it went to voicemail." Her explanation was so sincere, so believable, that I found myself glancing around the kitchen, half expecting to see her there with me. "Sorry to interrupt your chores," I muttered. "Anyway, I've got to run. Talk to you later." With that, I ended the call, and my mind went blank. I slumped into one of the kitchen chairs, attempting to reconcile her recent statement with what I knew to be the truth. Why lie? A sickening feeling washed over me as only one reason came to mind. But where was she exactly? We didn't have phone trackers. Then it hit me. She admired my new company car, so we bought a smaller used version from the same dealer for her. Both cars were connected to the manufacturer's app on my phone, allowing me to check their status, control the AC, and most importantly, locate them. In less than a minute, I had the app open, revealing her car's location. It was parked on a partly residential street on the outskirts of town, roughly 10 minutes away by car. I needed to find out why. I programmed my car's sat-nav with the location and set off. How I managed to arrive in one piece is beyond me. I barely remember the journey, but thankfully there were no disasters. Her car was parked outside an apartment building across from some small shops. The whole area looked a bit run down, with tattoo parlors, a betting shop, a nail salon, and a small convenience store, not exactly our usual shopping spots. There was also a quaint cafe on the block. After parking around the corner, I went inside, ordered a cup of tea from the charming teenager at the counter, and found a seat by the window with a clear view of her car. I had been there for just under 40 minutes and was enjoying my second cup when they emerged. A slender, still attractive woman with a man around our age, late 40s, a bit overweight and untidy. The woman was my wife, as I had feared, but who was he to her? Surely she wasn't involved with him. That notion was shattered when she let go of his hand and kissed him. A lover's kiss, dispelling any doubts. She undoubtedly just cheated on me with him. After she had broken free, gotten into her car, and driven away, I glanced at my phone. The video had captured every moment. Standing up, I made my way to the cafe door, planning to trail him back to his building. However, he opted to cross the road toward the shops instead. Taking a moment's pause, I stepped outside just in time to witness him entering the small store. I followed suit, still clutching my phone. The cashier attended to a customer while my target browsed the chiller cabinets. Positioning myself by the magazine rack opposite the counter, I aimed my phone's camera at him, recording video, all the while pretending to be engrossed in a phone call. As he approached the counter, I kept track of him, seemingly browsing the magazines on the rack. The conversation between him and the cashier turned out to be both informative and unpleasant. "Good morning, Kyle." The cashier greeted him. "Brunch." The cashier grinned, showing a package of bacon and a loaf of bread. "Leave me alone, Tris," my wife's lover retorted without much enthusiasm. "My ex ran in early to grab a quick snack, so I'm starving. We need to make up for the loss of protein," he joked, pointing to the bacon. "Do you think this is going to be a normal thing?" the cashier asked, not showing much interest. "She's fine so far, but I'm sure the new girl from the coffee shop will be more suitable. A couple of weeks will pass, and the novelty of the relationship with the ex will pass." He made a dismissive gesture. They both found it funny, but I kept a neutral expression on my face. Ironically, one of the magazines, entitled "How to Deal with Divorce," caught my attention. It seemed like the universe was mocking me today. On a sudden impulse, I grabbed it and put it on the counter when Kyle came out. "Is this for you?" Tris, now familiar to me, asked somewhat sympathetically. "More for my wife," I replied. "I think she might need it soon." She shrugged, looked through the magazine, took the money from me, and I dropped the change into the donation box. There may be something good on this terrible day, too. I observed Kyle entering the building across the street and casually followed suit. After scanning the names on the intercom, only one stood out, K. Bennett. I snapped a photo. My phone was definitely proving useful this morning. Concluding that there was nothing more to accomplish there, I headed back to the car to contemplate how to handle my crumbling world. At the corner, I paused and retraced my steps to the cafe. Only 2 tables were occupied, both tucked away in the corners. Leaning in, I spoke discreetly to the waitress who had served me. "Do you happen to know a guy named Kyle?" I inquired in a hushed tone. "He lives in an apartment across the street." "The obnoxious one," she replied, making a face. "Dresses like he just stepped out of an orphanage, but acts like he's the ultimate catch for every woman out there." I knew we were on the same page, So I brought up the video from the store and handed her my phone. "Hit play," I suggested. Her lips pressed together tightly as she listened to Kyle detailing his plans for Tress. "You shouldn't have evidence of this," she cautioned me as she connected my phone to hers via Bluetooth and transferred the video file. She grinned with a grim satisfaction when her phone confirmed receipt. "Can I ask for a favor in return?" I inquired. She nodded. "As long as it's reasonable," she agreed. "The other woman he's making fun of, his ex, is currently my wife," I clarified. "I need to address her betrayal before she discovers I'm onto them. Could you keep this under wraps until tomorrow, please?" I gave her my most pleading and pathetic expression. She recognized the situation and flashed me a grin. "Cut it out with the pleading look," she said. Then our mood turned serious. "I'm going to share this with my dad and my boyfriend. I won't disclose the source, but Kyle won't know what hit him. No one talks about me like that, especially not a sleazy guy like Kyle." She paused for a moment. "I won't reveal anything until at least the weekend, and they probably won't get physical with him until they've cooled down. I don't want anyone getting in trouble because of him." She practically spat out the words. I headed back to my car feeling satisfied with a job well done. It was a stroke of luck, really. I had hoped that the girl, Raquel, might pour a hot drink on him at best. Getting two guys to beat him up was beyond my expectations. It was time for me to shift from reacting to planning, and the office was the ideal setting for that. As the sales director of a plant hire business, I had valuable connections and resources there. I began by discussing the situation with my boss, the owner. "Danish, I need to let you know that I'm dealing with some personal challenges," I informed him. "I'll do my best to keep it separate from work, but I may not be operating at full capacity." "What about the McGregor deal?" he inquired, knowing its significance for the business. "Dave and I are both tangled up in family issues," I confessed with a tinge of regret. "We're meeting tonight, and I believe he's ready to finalize the agreement." Danish was understandably pleased. McGregor's growing construction business presented a significant opportunity for us. "I don't want the commission, boss," I said through clenched teeth. "Carrie has been unfaithful to me. I'm not sure for how long, but once is more than enough. The bottom line is," I continued with determination, "she won't see a dime of any commissions I earned from now on, including McGregor's." Danish paused to consider. "I'll have a word with my brother. You know he has a creative approach to accounting, and as long as we ensure the tax obligations are met, it's within our discretion how and when we compensate you." Sanjeev, his brother, also served as our finance director. Returning to my office, I felt content that the matter had been settled. Upon reflecting on my finances, oddly enough, I found myself disinclined to do anything further. Attempting to manipulate funds would only reflect poorly on me in the event of separating our lives. If Carrie chose to engage in games, I would play along. If she acknowledged the consequences of her actions with Kyle, I would be reasonable. Not overly generous, mind you, but reasonably so. Well, somewhat reasonable. At least I would endeavor to appear as such. Despite my lack of appetite, I asked Claire, our sales admin, to pick up a sandwich for me when she went to the local takeaway for her lunch. I usually enjoy the food from there. To this day, I still don't know what I ate during that lunchtime. While she was away, I found myself cyber-stalking Kyle Bennett, scrolling through his Facebook page. "Is he a friend of yours?" Claire asked cheerfully as she glanced over my shoulder at the images of Kyle in various states of drunkenness with his friends. I clicked on his relationship status, which read, "It's complicated," and pointed to the screen. "I'm almost certain that Carrie is one of his complications," I admitted. "If you ever notice that I'm not pulling my weight in the office, that's probably why. But you have to let me know. She might have messed up my personal life, but I'd appreciate your help in preventing her from sabotaging my career too." Claire was taken aback. She had met Carrie a few times and had liked her. I was confident that Danish wouldn't object to me seeking advice from our legal consultant regarding finding a solicitor to assist me through what seemed inevitable. He suggested MMC family law. I called and scheduled an appointment with James Murray, the second M, for the following Monday. Following the receptionist's suggestion, I started compiling a spreadsheet of our joint assets. Later, while being offered a comforting cup of coffee by a caring and understanding Claire, I transferred the photo and video files from my phone to my laptop, ensuring not to modify the originals. While not necessary for the divorce proceedings, I intended to keep evidence of infidelity as a potential bargaining chip or retaliation if Carrie became greedy. With some pride, I managed to edit out unnecessary parts of the video, resulting in a folder on my phone containing several photos and concise video clips that I planned to share with my partner that evening. If she dared to insult my ego, I vowed to myself that I would distribute the entire series across every social media platform available. Finally, I composed myself and revisited the documents I had prepared earlier for my meeting with Dave McGregor. Dinesh and Sanjeev were satisfied with the figures and had even authorized me to make minor concessions if Dave adopted a tough stance. As I left the office, I knew I had to maintain my professional demeanor and stay sharp. Overall, tonight was bound to be a turbulent ride, regardless of how it unfolded. For the remainder of the afternoon, I reflected on my marriage. Had there been any signs of dissatisfaction from Carrie? I didn't believe so. Although I had advanced within the firm over the years, it was a family-owned business, and as long as the work was completed efficiently, we all maintained reasonable working hours. Carrie couldn't argue that she was neglected due to my work commitments. How long had she been in a relationship with Kyle? When he mentioned she was his ex, I assumed he meant from our single days. But if she could so easily and cheerfully deceive me from his bed, should I have made that assumption? Maybe they got together and broke up while we were married. Perhaps there were others too. The implications of this made me almost sick to my stomach, wondering if our children were even biologically mine. The next 25 minutes were spent online searching for and ordering DNA testing swabs from a reputable service for 2 parents and 2 children. I opted for the premium service, certified for legal use, despite its hefty price tag of over £500. Damn her. Why couldn't she control herself? After I regained some strength, another concern dawned on me. When, even as the children grew more independent before they departed for university, we tended to stay home. She didn't go out clubbing with her friends. Sure, they would catch up occasionally, typically once a month or so, at each other's homes. They had been at ours. When was that? It must have been sometime last year. Then it hit me. If 4 women were taking turns hosting a girls' night in, I should see them 3 times a year, not just once. Damn. Were they all involved in covering for each other? Or was it solely Carrie engaging in such behavior, while the others provided her with an alibi out of loyalty? I drafted an email to the husbands of her friends. Hello everyone. I've recently discovered that my wife has been unfaithful. I suspect she's been using some of the evenings when she was supposed to be with your wives to meet other men. If my suspicions are correct, then either your wives were aiding her in concealing her infidelity, or they were doing the same. Just to clarify, I have no evidence against anyone except Carrie. However, if the 4 of them are regularly having girls' nights in every month, then I should surely be seeing them at my home much more frequently than I have. I've drawn my own conclusions, but how you choose to handle your own spouse is your decision. I regret having to involve you in this, but if they're all covering for each other, you deserve to know. Tony. I composed a message to the 3 men I had met and liked, then saved it in my email drafts folder. Thinking about the number of men led me to another unpleasant realization. Even if Kyle was the only one, his remarks and description of Raquel as a womanizer did not convince me of his concern for his health. I needed to get tested for his STDs. Let's go back to the internet. Thank God there is a national health service. One of their partners, ESH24, offered a covered health monitoring kit that would be delivered within 2 days completely free of charge. I ordered just one. As far as I knew, Carrie could handle her own problems. As I sat pondering my future, I began to truly grasp the true cost of dishonesty. From that moment on, I doubted I could believe anything my wife had told me. Well, there went 25 years of my life down the drain. I settled in, making an effort to regain my focus on the meeting, and largely succeeded. By 6:45 I rose, grabbed my briefcase, and headed to the King's Oak Hotel. Dave McGregor greeted me at reception, 5 minutes before our agreed time, and guided me to a table in the bar. The half-empty pint hinted that he'd been waiting for a while, observing my arrival in the car park. I needed some solitude to gather my thoughts, he explained, noticing my curiosity. I didn't pry. What would you like to drink? He inquired. I was about to decline, but he preempted me with a gesture. I understand. He cut in. It's customary for you, seeking my business, to ply me with drinks and meals, even more if you believe it will sway the deal, and if that's the sort of person you think I am. He smiled, somewhat tiredly. You didn't play games with me. You presented your service options and prices up front. That's how I conduct business, and I appreciate it, especially now. Thank you, Dave. In that case, I'll have a whiskey. A blend will do with 1 ice cube. Thanks again. He motioned to a waiter and ordered a Glenfiddich on the rocks, just 1 cube. The waiter acknowledged and went to fetch it. I glanced at Dave with curiosity. You seem as weary as I feel, he remarked. Let's get through the business first. Then we can commiserate. He chuckled wryly and observed as I pulled out the paperwork from my briefcase. I handed over the latest agreement we had finalized in his office the previous week. Equipment, maintenance, operator availability, fuel price adjustments, the works. He skimmed through it. You're aware this needs to go through the lawyers. Absolutely. Trust but verify, I responded. I'd have been surprised if you didn't insist on it. Did Denish leave any room for negotiation? He inquired. A little, I confessed. Here's the deal, he proposed. We'll accept this as is with the understanding that we're mature enough to honor the spirit of the agreement, rather than enriching lawyers by quibbling over technicalities. I agreed, emphasizing that our priority would be adhering to legal requirements. We were not willing to risk facing legal consequences for overlooking health and safety regulations. He shared our concern, and we resolved the matter informally with a handshake. All right, Tony, he said, relaxing in his seat. You seem pretty down. Anything bothering you? Need someone to talk to? I shook my head. Earlier today, I caught my wife in a lie. When I confronted her, I saw her leaving another man's apartment. I overheard him boasting about a quick encounter with his ex. I confessed, my voice wavering. Her deception was so effortless that now I question everything she's ever told me. I admitted, lifting my gaze from my drink. 25 years of hollow words, I added, taking a sip of my scotch. Damn, he cursed sympathetically. That must have been painful, he acknowledged, reaching for his glass and leaning back. I have to fly to Inverness tomorrow morning, he continued, taking a sip of his own drink. My mother passed away last year, and my father relocated to live with my sister. A friend informed me that she appears to be manipulating his grief to persuade him to alter his will in her favor. Almost entirely, he confided, sounding more sorrowful than angry. It's not about the money, he murmured to himself. I'll be fine either way, but, he looked at me, seeking understanding. She's my younger sister. I looked out for her when we were growing up. Doesn't that count for anything? He didn't anticipate a response from me, knowing I was grappling with the same dilemma. She was my spouse. I stood by her side and helped raise our 2 children. Didn't that hold any significance? I ordered the same drinks for both of us again, but Dave insisted on covering the cost. By 7:45 we were finished. We had settled our agreement and sealed it with a handshake. Dave was preparing to fly to Scotland to attend to his sister, and I had run out of excuses to avoid confronting my wife. Carrie must have heard me arrive, and could tell from my expression as I entered that I wasn't in the best mood. If I didn't know any better, I might have believed her concern was genuine. "What's wrong, love?" she asked. I shook my head. It was too complex to explain in the hallway. I gestured towards the kitchen. "Make me a coffee, and I'll fill you in on my day." As she prepared 2 cups of coffee, I retrieved my phone and briefcase and placed them on the kitchen table. On the drive home, I had mentally rehearsed what I wanted to say to her countless times. However, each rehearsal seemed to diverge from the last. The weight of hurt, doubt, and the erosion of assumptions made it feel almost trivial to merely articulate them. Yet it was imperative to address them now. I couldn't feign ignorance or postpone any longer. Before long, a cup of coffee materialized in front of me, and Carrie settled into the seat across from mine. "Was your meeting that rough?" she inquired, her expression filled with sympathetic concern. I admitted that it wasn't a pleasant experience. I said, "The person I was supposed to meet had to leave abruptly for an early morning flight." I attempted to sip my coffee, but it was still too hot. "Someone he trusted is betraying him, and he's forced to step away from his business to handle the situation." "That sounds terrible," Carrie sympathized. How I managed to maintain a straight face at her hypocrisy, I don't know. Did she have no shame? "Did you do anything interesting today?" I inquired, trying to appear innocent as I absent-mindedly played with my phone. "Not really," she sighed. "Just some laundry chores, the usual." "I hope I didn't disrupt your routine when I called this morning," I mentioned. "You seemed out of breath when you answered." I searched for any hint of regret or remorse. "It was fine," she chuckled. "I just had to rush from the clothesline to answer." No indication of guilt or embarrassment whatsoever. If I hadn't been standing there in the same kitchen alone just 10 hours earlier, I might have believed her. I cooled my coffee with a puff and took a sip. "That's what confuses me," I remarked. She furrowed her brow in response, prompting me to elaborate on my confusion. "Kyle lives on the 2nd floor. He doesn't have a garden." "So, where were you?" Her expression turned flustered. "I meant our garden." "Who's Kyle?" "Are they even mine?" I blurted out, my thoughts scattered. "Are what yours?" "Kyle, your ex. Don't you remember him?" "Tony, we've been married for over 25 years. I don't remember everyone I ever dated. I certainly don't recall anyone named Kyle." She sounded less sure now. "Maybe you dated him after we were married. You both worked for the same company, and it's on his social media around the time you got pregnant with Amy." She looked offended. "I never dated anyone after we were married, so just sleeping with them doesn't count," she added with a mocking tone. I asked for clarification, earning nothing more than an offended glare. I tapped my phone and showed it to her. "Your car was parked this morning 5 miles away while you were doing housework." She began to speak as I swiped the screen. "You're bidding Kyle a warm farewell." She gazed at the image, seemingly attempting to craft a plausible explanation. "You can understand my confusion," I clarified. "You claim to be out of breath because you hurried to the kitchen to answer your phone. Yet at that precise moment, I was right there." I gestured to the floor by the window overlooking the garden. "Making the call." I tilted my head and met her gaze, which made me question where you really were and why you were blatantly lying. I chose video clip number 1. Luckily, Kyle provided some assistance. I tapped the play icon, and his voice, though tinny, was unmistakable, filling the kitchen. My ex showed up early for a quick rendezvous, so now I'm bloody starving. I needed to know. Call me pathetic if you want. Does he have a strong build like a horse? Please confirm that this is the case, or tell me he's a machine that can last an hour. Tell me he has a tongue the length of a giraffe's and can even lick his own eyebrows. Please, Carrie, at least give me a decent explanation for why you betrayed me so much." She was silent. Tears welled up in her eyes. I wasn't sure who she was crying about. I could hardly believe it was because of me. I wasn't going to miss this chance. "Was it love, Carrie? Were you torn between 2 men who loved you?" I waited for her answer, but she seemed numb. Let's hear what Kyle has to say. I selected video number 2 and clicked play. The Kyle and Trish show aired the next episode. Do you think this will become a regular thing? Trish asked through the speaker of my phone. I'll give it a couple of weeks until the novelty wears off, Kyle replied. I had included the obscene gesture and raucous laughter in the clip, for obvious reasons. So, I turned to my current wife. Back to my original question, are they mine? She was taken aback. Confused, she glanced back at me. What? I don't understand. I get it, I said with faint concern. Out of sight, out of mind. Like me when you were with Kyle. Allow me to remind you. Are Amy and Brian your children? She recoiled, evidently horrified. How could you even ask? She choked out. I clarified. Because today, while you chuckled, recounting your presence in our kitchen, you were actually in bed with a man you claimed not to know. In my mind, he was likely engaged with you even as we conversed. I observed to gauge her comprehension. Given the effortless manner in which I now perceive your deceit, I must reevaluate everything you've ever conveyed to me. I would never deceive, she started. I gestured for her to stop. No need to fret. I've arranged for court-approved paternity test kits for you, me, and the children. By this time next week, we'll have certainty. She dashed to the downstairs bathroom, and I heard the sound of her retching. Now she understands my anguish. As I finished my coffee, I opened my draft email, contemplating the ramifications of sending it. After a few minutes, Carrie returned, looking pale and drained. I hadn't finished. You also lied about the girls' night out, I lamented. God, I feel so foolish. While I assumed you were at home discussing your husband's flaws, you were actually out engaging in promiscuous behavior and covering for each other. I'm not proud of what I did to confirm it. This part was a bluff, but I didn't want to bear the burden of needlessly destroying marriages. She sat silently, staring at me. Were you all involved? I shouted loudly. She jumped, startled. Just me and Jamie, she muttered. The others thought we were being foolish, but they agreed to cover for us. I made small changes to my original email and clicked send. Carrie sat hunched over with her head in her hands, oblivious to my actions. You still haven't answered my question, I reminded her. Kyle. Was he worth it? Was he that great? Why does it matter? She asked in a lifeless voice. Why does it even matter? I need to understand what made you risk our marriage and cast a shadow over every milestone in our children's lives. Every Christmas, every birthday, every wedding, every grandchild. Our children will now live with divorced parents. I just want to believe that there was a good reason for it. She began to cry, her head shaking. No, it wasn't like that at all. I was just trying to be someone I'm not. Kyle was simply there. What about Jamie's husband? I inquired. How will he react? And the other men? I pressed on. How will they feel knowing their wives were knowingly covering for two friends who were out indulging in promiscuity? How secure will those men feel? She continued to shake her head, tears streaming down her face. My own eyes welled up, feeling sorrow for the foolish women and their unsuspecting partners who were caught up in Carrie's mess. Please don't tell them, she pleaded. I can't stay silent, not like your friends did to me. They betrayed me for you, and now I'm returning the favor. But suddenly, you have a conscience. Their feelings matter now. You've been deceiving me for years without a second thought. My anger was palpable now. Well, damn you and damn your friends. The email has already been sent. I expect your phone to start buzzing any moment now. I went upstairs, dropping a copy of How to Handle Divorce on the table on the way. The next day, I grabbed a fresh set of clothes for work and settled into a spare room. Anticipating that Carrie might try to sort things out or resort to intimacy as a reconciliation, I slipped a chair under the door handle just in case. However, I didn't hear anything. Feeling emotionally drained, I must have fallen asleep shortly after midnight. The next morning, when I descended the stairs after a fitful night, she was nowhere to be found. There was a note left on the kitchen table. Beloved Tony, you were justified in labeling me as unfaithful, and I deeply regret the pain I've caused you. I cannot fully explain or excuse my actions, but I can address the question you posed last night. Kyle doesn't surpass you in any aspect. He was simply an acquaintance. I was never torn between two lovers. You are the sole man I've loved, and who has truly loved me. I've retreated to my mother's home. I'll arrange to retrieve my remaining belongings when you're at work. I understand if you'd rather not see me again. I accept that our marriage is over, and I accept full responsibility. Your magazine made it clear that I have no grounds to object, and given my behavior, I wouldn't even if I could. I'll talk to Amy and Brian this weekend and explain my actions. I doubt they'll want me involved in their future events, so you needn't worry about encountering me and having to maintain civility. I regret that you shared my indiscretions with our friends' husbands. However, I'm hardly an authority on morality, so perhaps your decision was appropriate. Now I must bear the consequences. I leave you with this. The fault lies entirely with me, and despite any judgment you may pass, my love for you never wavered. Carrie. On Monday evening, 3 days after Carrie left, I met with Lance and his wife Margot, who was one of Carrie's alibi friends. Lance had reached out to me, informing me that Margot wanted me to apologize and share some information that might be useful to me. Intrigued, I agreed to meet them at the bar in the King's Oak Hotel. Upon my arrival, the atmosphere was tranquil. I found them sitting in a booth in the farthest corner from the entrance. As I passed by the bar, I ordered a Glenfiddich on ice and was instructed to join my companions as the waiter would deliver my drink. It was a departure from my usual hangouts. As I approached their table, Lance stood up and extended his hand. "How are you holding up, Tony?" he inquired. "I've been better," I admitted. I turned towards Margot. She had also stood up, tears welling in her eyes, unsure of how to approach me. "Tony, I'm so sorry. Can I give you a hug?" Taken aback by the sincerity and emotion in her voice, I instinctively opened my arms. She embraced me, her body trembling with sobs until she finally composed herself and released me. "Oh God," she exclaimed, "I've ruined your shirt now." The waiter was incredibly thoughtful and brought a handful of paper towels with my scotch. I dabbed myself dry and then glanced at Lance. He had invited me. He made a face. "When I received your message, I showed it to Margot." He shook his head. She burst into tears, and it took nearly an hour for her to regain composure. He took a deep breath and continued. "She confessed to agreeing to cover for Carrie if you ever inquired about girls' night, which led to a lot of questions from me about her own actions." He looked me straight in the eye. "I'm sorry, Tony, but in that moment I was worried that my own marriage was falling apart too. You weren't my primary concern." I acknowledged that I understood his perspective and took a sip of my drink. He continued. "By the time Margot had convinced me she hadn't been deceiving me, the weekend was nearly over. We both believed things were fine. Then she hit me with this bombshell." He noticed my intense focus on his words. "Tony, Margot is my wife. She's telling you this because I asked her to. We disagreed on whether you should know, but Margot realizes she's too close to be impartial now. Please hear her out and understand she could have kept this to herself forever." I pondered his words. Tony seemed to think I deserved to know. Margot preferred my ignorance. It echoed the dilemma I faced that dreadful Thursday, debating whether to reveal Carrie's friends' secrets to their spouses. Turning to Margot, I said, "You never actually lied to me because I never asked. But this feels worse, doesn't it?" Her eyes welled up once more. She nodded in agreement. "Then please tell me. I promise I'll do my best to remain composed, okay?" Margot sought her husband's hand for comfort. "Carrie and I were close before you two got married," she began. "Things changed when you started dating. It was clear to all her friends that you were the one." I couldn't help but chuckle at that. She shook her head sadly. "I understand it might not seem that way now, but it's the truth. After you got married, She really wanted children, but you were the practical one, convincing her to wait a couple of years until you were more settled in your career, so she patiently waited for you to be ready. Margot fixed her gaze on me. Except she didn't. She confessed to me a few years later at Jamie's bachelorette party, when she was quite drunk, that she had stopped taking birth control after your first anniversary. She felt you had settled into your job so smoothly, like a tailored suit, that there was no point in waiting. I cut in, but Amy wasn't conceived until a year later. She was silent, head down, while Lance squeezed her hand. Drawing strength from his presence, she did not give up. Tony, Amy is not yours. I doubt Brian is either. While you were at home with your adorable daughter, she confessed to me what she had done. I leaned back in my chair, realizing that the DNA analysis was not done in vain, although I hoped to the last that it was not. Margot tried to pull herself together, even though tears were streaming down her cheeks. Maybe we shouldn't have started this conversation in public, but she's not done yet. At first, Carrie thought that her inability to get pregnant was due to the long-term effects of contraceptives. In the end, she secretly took your biomaterial and took it for analysis. She managed to convince someone in the lab that her partner had requested a vasectomy, and she needed to make sure he wasn't lying. The laboratory informed her that it was evident he hadn't undergone a vasectomy, as there were sperm present in the sample. However, she reassured her that she was safe because they couldn't detect any that were motile. She glanced at me with a miserable expression. She confided in me that Amy couldn't be yours because you were unable to conceive. She believed she could never bear your children. I attempted to comprehend what Margot was conveying. I was sterile, yet my wife longed for children desperately. A nauseating sensation crept over me as I feared I knew the direction this conversation was taking. Kyle, I inquired. She looked puzzled and said, I don't know anyone named Kyle. I can tell that around the time of your second anniversary, she was purposefully looking for men. It is worth noting that she was intoxicated when she told me about it about 20 years ago. Her goal was to find a man like you and get pregnant. She stressed that these meetings were not romantic for her. They were purely business. Amy's biological father was one of these people, and it's possible that your Kyle was among them too. However, she didn't give me any specific names. Margot's expression now betrayed a sense of guilt. Lance and I didn't see eye to eye on this. When I revealed to him this weekend what I had learned years ago, he insisted that I should have informed you immediately. However, at that point, Amy was already your daughter, and you cherished her deeply. Carrie had burdened me with this knowledge, and no matter what action I took, there seemed to be no positive outcome for either of us. If I had disclosed the truth, you might have lost your wife and the daughter you held dear. If I hadn't, you would have continued to love a child who wasn't biologically yours. I concluded that maintaining your blissful ignorance by remaining silent was the least detrimental option for both of us. Margot paused, lifting her glass. When Carrie disclosed her second pregnancy, I was taken aback. Once was challenging enough, but twice. She swirled her drink contemplatively. I can't say for certain, but that might have been when the thrill started. You see, maybe that's when she realized how effortlessly she could attract men. However, that realization only dawned on me more recently. I was unaware of any affairs until Amy left for college and the girls' nights began. Even then, Carrie never divulged any specifics to us. She simply wanted us to cover for her if it ever came up in conversation. Whatever she did on those occasions was between her and eventually Jamie. She fixed her gaze on me. Tony, I'm deeply sorry. I had the opportunity to speak up, but once I chose to remain silent, I felt trapped. I was afraid that everything would collapse if you discovered the truth. I won't ask for forgiveness, as I may not deserve it. This is all I can do, to disclose what I know. Feel free to ask anything, but I believe I've already revealed everything. I sat in silence as they observed me reevaluate every aspect of my marriage. Finally, I spoke. What about the others? Were they aware? She shook her head. I doubt it. We never discussed it. It was clear Carrie was hiding something when she asked us to cover for her. But about the kids? I don't think so. Margot paused, reflecting. I was unwell and still on medication at the party, so I abstained from drinking. I regret ever attending. Her sincerity was evident in her tone. She continued. The others, including Carrie, were completely intoxicated by then. Even if they overheard our conversation, I doubt they'd recall anything the next morning. She gazed earnestly at me. I don't think Carrie even remembers telling me. We conversed further, but Margot had little else to offer. I accepted her apologies naturally. Why? Because Carrie was her friend, not mine. Because she was right. By the time she learned about Amy's paternity, I had already formed a bond with my daughter. Because when Carrie became pregnant again, Margot was already complicit in her silence. I struggled more to forgive her for agreeing to provide Carrie with an alibi. Margot sat quietly as I expressed my feelings about that. Lance stepped in. Margot won't defend herself. She's willing to accept any blame you place on her. He gently squeezed her hand. They were evidently an affectionate couple, just like I had thought my wife and I were. He continued, explaining that Margot felt guilty for keeping silent about Carrie's past actions all those years ago. However, Margot was never actively involved in any wrongdoing. While she did agree to cover for Carrie, when questioned last Thursday about Carrie's presence at their girls' nights, Margot admitted the truth, unaware that it had already been disclosed to him. We parted ways, if not as close friends, at least on amicable terms. I couldn't blame Margot for wanting to distance herself from the turmoil of my marriage. Over the following weeks, I felt numb. Claire was incredibly supportive, ensuring I ate lunch, managing my workload, and even inviting me to dinner with her and her partner, Gail, on several occasions. An email from SH24 confirmed I was free from any STIs, which brought relief, but I couldn't muster any gratitude toward my wife for sparing me that humiliation. It shouldn't have been a concern in the first place. In the end, the DNA test results confirmed Margot's account as I had anticipated. Although it kept me up at night, I felt compelled to share the results with both kids so they could understand the reason for the test. Ignoring the situation was not an option. So, what were the findings? Amy and Brian shared a mother, but had different fathers, neither of whom was biologically related to me. Carrie chose not to provide her sample, likely foreseeing the inevitable outcome. At 22, Amy was the older of the two. It was a harsh revelation that my wife had been unfaithful throughout our marriage. Admittedly, my bond with the children became strained for a period. We treaded cautiously around each other, me fearing rejection as not their biological father, and them fearing blame for their mother's infidelity. A month following that dreadful Thursday, they returned home from their respective universities, and we engaged in a lengthy conversation to clear the air and come to an understanding. It proved challenging for all three of us. Amy, being a woman, could empathize with her mother's desire to have a child, although she recoiled at the method Carrie had chosen for conception. Brian, the impartial one, found himself conflicted as well. His mother's actions offended him deeply, yet without them, neither he nor his sister would exist. He grappled with reconciling his emotions regarding this matter. Despite the biological circumstances, they are my children. I raised them, and I cherish them both deeply, almost as much as I despise their mother. 11 months have passed since then. The divorce process was conducted with almost clinical precision. We split our assets, but I managed to keep most of the funds because she didn't mind. I'm not sure if the kids will communicate with Carrie. They've learned not to mention her name in my presence. I also severed all ties with her family, which is a pity, because I used to get along well with her mother. Jamie's husband tried to reconcile, but even after therapy, he could not perceive his wife as the person he married. Their divorce was more complicated, but now it's over. Allison, like Margot, managed to convince her husband that she was trying to reason with Carrie and Jamie, but decided not to interfere further in this matter. She insisted that, although she had never volunteered about Carrie and Jamie's actions, she would have told the truth if asked. She and her husband are still together, although he apparently insisted that she remove these two girls from their social circle. Oh yes, I almost forgot. About 8 months ago, I went to have lunch at a small cafe on the outskirts of the city. I was served by a charming young lady named Raquel. As she placed a plate of fried eggs and French fries in front of me, she casually mentioned the recent robbery. Apparently, a guy from one of the neighboring apartments was attacked and seriously injured. 2 guys were wearing masks. He was so shocked by this that he moved out after being discharged from the hospital. Raquel didn't seem too worried about his departure, and I just chuckled a little. I still meet Dave McGregor for drinks from time to time. It turns out that his sister suspected that her husband was going to leave her and decided to further influence her father's will. Dave smiled sadly when he shared this story with me. A stupid woman thinks that the business still belongs to her father. He is not as ignorant as she thinks and is well aware of her intentions. He keeps her on her toes, and in the end, she won't have anything beyond what she would have gotten anyway. He shook his head sadly. And yet she betrayed my trust, and all in vain. He paused, then raised his glass. For the trust. We exchanged knowing glances, raising our glasses, and here I am, in my early 40s, a typically empty man. 2 children are studying at the university, and the ex-wife, who seems to have disappeared into thin air, the last I heard about her, is that she lives with her mother. My relationship with my ex-wife's friends is cool at best. Claire from the office mentioned that she knows several unmarried friends who would be interested in meeting me. I didn't take her gesture very positively. However, it brought a smile to my face, so maybe I'm finally on the road to recovery. Thanks to everyone who took the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed it, please consider liking and subscribing if you haven't already. Feel free to share your thoughts on the events in the comments below. Take care.